Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the supreme confidence of ignorance. Apparently people believe that ignorance is bliss, but I'm of the opinion that there's a lot more that needs to be answered before we can start heading in the right direction. I've put together these thoughts over the last few days. We live in a time when the critical answers to the great questions of today are not only never forthcoming, but you will also get fired for asking these very questions, questions that the state refuses to answer. The authorities have created the perfect damned if you do and damned if you don't scenario. Of course, to remedy this situation, we first need to ask the correct questions in an atmosphere where determining the root causes of our problems is the actual goal of the questioning. Sadly, this is not the case. I'll give you an anecdotal tale. I was down in Niagara this past weekend and I got talking to some folks about our current crisis. And these are people that are, how can I put it, willfully blind. I think that's the best way to put it. And I asked the one chap if he had read Alexei de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, which is one of the great books on examining the reasons for the successes of democracy in America in the 1830s, when that nation was still young. His wife burst out in hilarity when I asked that question. Why would we be reading that? We're not interested in democracy. And in her response, I could see exactly. First of all, she said we. She spoke in the collective sense, as though she is nothing other than an extension of her husband, and her husband nothing other than an extension of her. That's the first thing that I found troubling about her response. And the second thing is that even after all of the problems that we have had over these last several years, but particularly since COVID, she thought that even being concerned about democracy was giggle-worthy. And she was totally unaware that the confidence of her ignorance was on full display, that she didn't even wish to attempt to not even acknowledge that there is a problem or attempt to understand how democracy functions. And of course, anyone who lives in a democracy should know one simple rule about democracy. It does not maintain itself. It is up to us to ensure that we are living in a healthy democracy under parliamentary oversight and the rule of law, which is why I recommended Alexei de Tocqueville's book, because he gave the many reasons why America was as functional as it was in the 1830s, and of course, a great deal of it had to do with faith and the morality that resulted from the godliness of society at that time. There is a newspaper in Norway called VG, VG, we would say in English. And it just posted an article, and I'll attach it to this podcast. I want you to read it. I've translated it into English, and so I will read from that article, but I encourage you also to go to the article and translate it for yourself into English. The EU's vaccine purchases are being investigated. The EU's joint prosecution has opened an investigation into the European Commission's procurement of corona vaccines worth billions of euros. This exceptional confirmation comes after there has been extremely great public interest, says a brief statement from the EU Prosecution Office, EPPO, on Friday. No further details will be released at this stage, adds the EPPO. It is unclear what or who is the target of the investigation. The European Commission has negotiated and fulfilled contracts for several 100 million vaccine doses on behalf of the EU. The 27 member states themselves have been responsible for purchasing the vaccine from the EU's central warehouses. Norway has also participated in the EU's vaccine cooperation and has gained access to corona vaccines for the Norwegian population through an agreement with the EU. I will add an addendum here that twice the Norwegians voted no to joining the EU, and yet her government still sold her out and has signed on to virtually all of the agreements that any participating nation would be a part of, against the will of the people. Subtitled Text Messages. An agreement with BioNTech Pfizer to purchase 1.8 billion doses from spring 2021 has been the subject of particular public attention. The value of the agreement was estimated at the time to be 35 billion euros. The New York Times has written that personal contact between Pfizer's CEO Albert Bourla and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was necessary to nail the deal. Journalists have not been given access to text messages exchanged between the two, despite requests for public access. Investigations, among other things, corruption. A spokesperson for the European Commission tells the AFP news agency that all questions must be directed to the EPPO as it is an independent prosecuting authority. With regard to the SMS case, I would like to emphasize that the President did not negotiate the contracts, adds the spokesperson. The EPPO was opened in 2021 with headquarters in Luxembourg. The body is authorized to investigate and bring to court cases concerning crime where the EU budget is involved. For example, cases involving corruption or misuse of EU funds. So far, 83% of the EU's population has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. In September of 2019, a dear friend of mine, very dear, who works for senior members of the Norwegian government, was told by a more senior member of that government in the Foreign Affairs Office that they would not be celebrating 17. Mai, Ishua. They would not be celebrating their national holiday, the 17th of May in 2020. So my question is, how the hell did that person know that COVID was coming long before anyone had ever heard of COVID-19? These are questions that people like the one to whom I am referring now would lose their gig if they were to ask the question. We live in dangerous times, and these are not times where anyone ought to be mocking or laughing at taking good care that our democracy is functioning and that we have the freedom and indeed the right to ask questions and get answers from our malfeasant, globalist shills that we call leaders. Gosh, I hope that's something to think and pray about this Sunday. God bless you all. You're listening to the Philosophy for Philistines channel, also known as Politics for Plebeians, right here in Ottawa, the very center of this cultural Marxist takedown of limited constitutional parliamentary democracy in Canada. God save Canada from Trudeau, the treasonous traitor.